Welcome to Soothtopia Insights. Welcome back to Soothtopia Insights, the podcast where knowledge creates a utopia. I'm Kevin, and with me today is my co-host, Clara.
Hey everyone, glad to be back. Today we're diving into a topic that's been on a lot of people's minds. Has COVID-19 impacted our focus and memory? We've all been through so much in the past few years, and we're seeing how that has affected our mental health, so we want to talk about how those effects impact our cognitive functions.
Exactly. The pandemic has been a shared global experience, but beyond the immediate health crisis, what are the lasting psychological and cognitive impacts?
Well, let's start with the psychological side. Studies show that the pandemic led to a surge in stress, anxiety, and depression across various populations. We're talking about children, college students, and healthcare workers, just to name a few. This is not just about the fear of getting sick. It's about prolonged stress, social distancing, and the constant sense of uncertainty. It's this psychological burden that can affect our relationships, create social isolation, and even change how we empathize with others.
It's easy to understand how constant stress would take a toll. But what about our actual cognitive abilities like focus and memory? Are we seeing a decline there?
Absolutely. It's not just about feeling stressed. There's evidence that COVID-19 can impact specific cognitive functions. A meta-analysis of studies has shown that short-term memory, especially verbal memory, is particularly at risk in people who've recovered from COVID-19. There's also evidence that visual short-term memory and attention may be affected too.
That's pretty concerning. So, is this all because of the virus itself, or are other factors at play?
It seems to be a mix of both. There are medical and psychological hypotheses to consider. Medically, COVID-19 can impact the central nervous system, affecting brain structures crucial for memory, like the hippocampus. There's also the possibility of inflammation, and some studies suggest a nose-to-brain route for the infection. Neurological issues such as strokes, while rare, can also lead to cognitive decline.
So the virus is directly impacting our brains in some cases.
Exactly. And then there's the psychological side. The increased stress, anxiety, depression, and even PTSD that people experienced during the pandemic all contribute to cognitive issues. For example, depression is linked to working memory problems, and stress hormones like cortisol can affect both short-term and long-term memory. Even the feeling of forced empathy, where we feel like we should have to feel close to people, could lead to social withdrawal and phobias in the long run.
It's a complex picture, isn't it? It's not just that we're feeling distracted. Our brains might be going through actual changes. It sounds like certain groups have been particularly affected. I know in our last conversation we discussed how college students might be especially vulnerable.
Yes, college students have been greatly impacted. Studies show that they've experienced heightened stress and anxiety. Many reported social isolation, difficulty concentrating, and worries about their academic performance. The shift to online learning also presented significant challenges, with many struggling with focus and motivation. What's more, many have experienced an increase in depressive and even suicidal thoughts. One study found that worries about their own health and their loved ones were really prominent stressor.
It's alarming to think about the mental health challenges faced by students during this time. What about other at-risk groups like healthcare professionals?
Healthcare workers have also faced enormous challenges. They've experienced high levels of stress, exhaustion, and PTSD due to the constant risk of infection and the emotional toll of caring for so many patients. Many healthcare workers have reported symptoms of depression, anxiety, and insomnia, and the constant fear of contagion often led to obsessive thoughts and isolation.
It's incredibly tough to hear about what our healthcare professionals have been through. So it's clear that the pandemic is affecting so many people's mental health. What can be done to address these issues?
Well, there are a number of things that can be done, and the first step is acknowledging that the pandemic's impact on mental health is real. Telepsychology and online counseling can be incredibly helpful for addressing these issues, especially while respecting social distancing. We need to focus on providing tailored online support to those at-risk populations, like students, healthcare workers, and parents. Training psychotherapists in managing online devices is also essential.
That makes sense. But what about people who might be struggling with cognitive changes but don't have access to professional help? Are there things they can do on their own?
Absolutely. There are steps people can take to support their cognitive and mental health. Having reliable access to accurate information is helpful, and avoiding social media misinformation is important. People who are actively following preventative measures, have positive coping mechanisms, and have good social support tend to have better mental health outcomes during the pandemic. It's also useful to engage in activities that promote mental well-being and reduce stress, such as exercising and mindfulness.
It's encouraging to know there are practical steps we can take. But what about the long-term effects? Are these cognitive and mental health issues something we will live with permanently?
That's what researchers are trying to understand right now. While some studies show that cognitive symptoms can last for a while, there's evidence that they improve over a few months. However, more controlled studies with validated computerized tests are needed to understand the long-term implications fully. We also have to remember that everyone's experience of the pandemic is different, so these effects might vary greatly from person to person.
So while it seems that COVID-19 can impact our focus and memory, especially in the short term, it's not necessarily a permanent state, and there are ways to support our cognitive health. I think that's an important takeaway. Thank you, Clara, for helping us understand this complex issue.
Thanks, Kevin. It's been an important conversation, and we hope our listeners have a better understanding of how the pandemic has impacted all of us.
That's all the time we have for today's episode of Soothtopia Insights. Join us next week when we'll be exploring, well, a topic that we haven't figured out yet. Stay tuned for some last-minute brilliance. Until then, stay safe, stay curious, and remember, don't Google things at 3 a.m. unless you're prepared for the rabbit holes.